to get us started and welcome you to what is the first of the K Club reboot. This is a longstanding early career faculty seminar series that took a little rest and we're back. It's cross-institutional, so it's across the street as well as here at Children's, focused on early career faculty and the early career transition. And especially those working towards establishing a program of research. Stay tuned for future sessions where the next one will be a panel of K scholars or K awardees talking about their transition to a K award. I'm Meg Zeller, and professor of pediatrics here at Children's and the PI training director of the CCTST K Scholars program. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Samir Shah. He is an accomplished physician, academician, and leader at our institution. You can see all those accolades there. A very long list of accomplishments, but I want to share that I will admit I met Dr. Shah for the first time just about 10 minutes ago. Yet I feel like I've known him for several years. During the pandemic, I began a deeper dive into academic Twitter and found connection and stimulation during the pandemic in particular, small bites of wisdom and advocacy. And I found my way to Dr. Shah's posts. There I learned about his critical leadership as editor-in-chief of the Journal of Hospital Medicine, of how he and his colleagues were going to upend racism and how their journal approaches publishing and peer review. I found it inspiring and it drew me in. I was further inspired by his authentic style of leadership in general, in his letters from the editor, breaking down real topics that face us all in academic medicine. Here are a few titles. Put away the shoe polish, strengthen a learning culture by embracing vulnerability. Social media as a catalyst to improve personal health, where you could follow him on Twitter and whether he was meeting his health goals. Mission-driven chutzpah and other life lessons. And then Finding Your Bagel, which I read in 2021. It was a great letter that I thought to myself and told Krista Metz, who's director of our operations of our program, I'm like, we need to get Dr. Shah to open K Club with Finding Your Bagel. Here we have it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. This is meant to be pretty informal, so feel free to ask questions at any point along the way. There are some parts of this talk where you'll be doing some of the heavy lifting instead of me, and I'll give you a heads up when those come. So I don't have any potential conflicts. I have several national rules that I don't think pose a conflict of interest with this talk. Rather, they probably have some synergy. And many thanks to Angela Satil and Didi Unak for providing input and letting me borrow a couple of their slides. All right, so our learning objectives: identify key attributes of a compatible mentor, identify key responsibilities of the mentee, and discuss how a mentor might sponsor a mentee, and in particular, how a mentee may help their mentor provide sponsorship for them. All right, I want you all to reflect on these three questions, and because we're going to come back to them over the course of the talk. So what are the key factors that contribute to successful mentor-mentee relationships? Have you had an outlier experience, either positive or negative, as a mentor or mentee? What stood out about these experiences? And then the last is, what are the tangible ways in which you have benefited either as a mentor or a mentee? So we're gonna stop here for this last question about how you've benefited as being either a mentor or a mentee. And would love to hear a couple of people share an experience. You don't need to name names, but just want to hear about the experiences and the benefit.
Getting a first grant, a first publication, and getting this job.
Excellent. Anyone else? I'm gonna need one more person to share before I move this forward.
So I've had both experiences of like a club where they don't do a lot for you, but expect a lot from you, and also like too much sort of like coddling. And I feel like I've benefited from both of those in different ways because some require me to find things in myself and others, they both actually do, right? Because you're coddled, you have to still sort of step forward, even though you're not being pushed, and if you're being pushed, you really have to think you can find yourself for it. So I feel like even in bad experiences, I've grown as a person regardless.
Yeah, that's a great point because there are absolutely times when coddling is what's necessary, and there are absolutely times when tough love is necessary. But ideally, they are mixed within the same mentoring-mentee relationship, not all one thing or all the other. All right. So, what is mentorship? Merriam-Webster defines this as influence, guidance, or direction given by a trusted counselor. And that's great, but it's hard to know what to do with that information. And so the definition I prefer, which I think is more actionable, is that it's a dynamic reciprocal relationship in a work environment between an advanced career incumbent, the mentor, and a relative beginner, the mentee, aimed at promoting the career development of both. There are some important components of what we broadly define as mentorship, but within that, there are lots of subcategories. So the traditional, what we think of traditionally as a mentor, coach, sponsor, connector, all of those things. And equally important to those are your peer mentors, because those are the folks who can help you hold yourself accountable. Over the past couple of years, some writing groups have emerged where groups of people will go to somewhere offsite, often the 1819 building, which doesn't cost anything to reserve rooms, and hold a writing retreat where everybody at the start of the retreat says, hey, these are my goals for today. And for the next 4 hours, people work. And at the end, they talk about whether they've accomplished their goals or what a barrier was. So it's a really nice and supportive environment. What I want to talk to you a little bit about is, finding your bagel and what the heck that means. When I was in medical school, I had a friend who just absolutely loved to eat cream cheese. If you just gave him a big tub of cream cheese and a spoon, he would scarf it down in about 15 minutes. But I think, as you all can imagine, it's not socially acceptable to walk around holding a big tub of cream cheese and scooping it. So his friend just started eating lots of bagels. And, it was a bagel that was this much, and then the cream cheese was up here. And that was his way of getting what he wanted or maybe needed, given how much cream cheese he ate. The passion, right? What you're trying to accomplish, that's the cream cheese. The bagel was the vehicle to get there. So the bagel is the mentor. And there are times when there may not be someone in your immediate environment who serves as that vehicle to help propel you. And in an ideal situation, it might be that the mentor works in the same field, within the ballpark on the same area of study. But that doesn't always happen. I think probably less often here at Cincinnati Children's compared with smaller places. But if you're working in a particular niche area, there may not be many people who fit that bill, or the people who fit that bill may already be overcommitted and in mentoring relationships and trying to balance all of those things. And so the way I think about this is, if you know or can figure out what your goal is, what is the skill you want to develop, there may be lots of people who have that particular skill who are not in your discipline. If you were a junior faculty member who was really interested in conducting clinical trials, in, in the area of child psychiatry and thinking about which medications might be more effective in particular situations. If there's no one doing it, but there's a cardiologist who has deep expertise in clinical trials, that may be the bagel for you. And working with them may allow you to develop that clinical trial skill set that you're desiring. They may not have the clinical content expertise of the area, but odds are it's pretty easy to find someone else who can serve as a co-mentor who brings that clinical content expertise. So there are lots of ways to get mentorship, right? It may be in another division, it may be in another department, it may be, for the children's folks, it may be UC. For the UC folks, it may be on the children's side. Sometimes it's not someone local, but someone who's invested in your career path in some way, shape, or form. So think broadly when you think about mentorship, because the person with the perfect content expertise and the perfect skill set often doesn't exist. Any questions or comments? Right. So there are some important characteristics and qualities of mentoring relationships. And what I've listed here are things that are important from a mentor standpoint, right? Someone who's inspirational, empathetic, honest and credible, available and approachable, someone who you see as a role model. They're resourceful, they are a good listener, and they communicate well, and they're relatively modest or humble and flexible. On the mentee side, as a mentor, what I think we love is someone who's motivated, who's self-reflective, who's honest, who's organized and persistent, who's active and creative, receptive to constructive feedback, someone who's relatively humble, and someone who's resilient. I think all of you know resiliency and persistence are two things that are needed to have success in a career in research, because there will be lots of failures, right? It will be rare that you get your grants accepted or funded on the first submission. You will apply for leadership roles either locally or within a national organization for which you won't be selected. Those things happen, and to come out of that still having confidence in yourself takes a lot of resiliency and a lot of persistence to keep going forward in that scenario. So I'd like to hear from you all. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So inspiring to realize that once you get to that point of the adventure, you're not going to have it all, like you said,
Yeah.
well, when to reach out and when to say, you know what, I think we need some more advice if we need to do this grant. I think I've done my best, but I think we need some more eyes on it, or we need to bring someone else in. So I found that like really key, and make there's such a dynamic relationship where everyone's self-reflective and we're all kind of growing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great call out on the importance of the ability to or the capacity to self-reflect on the mentor's side. Anyone else have anything they would add to either list? Yeah, Barb.
I think we're both perhaps being a connector, connecting you with the people that, as you were saying, sometimes you need other eyes, but sometimes you just need to know who's a good person to work with or what that might look like. And so being a connector, either on the mentor side for sure, but perhaps also on the mentee side. I've had mentors thank me for the connections that I've made for them. So
yeah, that's a great call out on the importance of someone being a connector. Great. Anything else you'd like to add?
I think
like an understanding of shared goals and individual goals. So I think a lot of times we're working with mentors on goals that are collective or aligned with the team, but there might also be, goals that the mentor has and really tied to the mentee or goals that the mentee has in mind for the mentor supports and really understanding that you will probably be working with all of these things together.
Yeah, that's a great call out. Anything else? I would like to add? All right. What determines success in a mentor-mentee relationship? Obviously, amount of time allocated for the role, particularly for mentors, the level of commitment to this relationship by both the mentor and the mentee, clear goals, clearly articulated roles and expectations, regular communication and feedback, and probably most essential is a system for monitoring progress and providing formal and psychologically safe feedback or evaluation. If you as a mentor never, only receive praise, it's probably because people are worried about providing constructive or meaningful critique. If you as a mentee only receive praise, I would worry that you're being coddled. It needs to be both of those things, but it has to be done in a way that is constructive, not destructive. And I think we all have seen examples or experienced examples where that the system ends up being more harmful than helpful. And that's far from an ideal state. All right. Yeah.
Can you comment on how you do that? How do you set up that kind of environment where, especially for the mentees to feel safe in giving the mentor criticism?
It's a great question about how do you do this. Some of the things I do is I've started to write a lot about leadership and mentorship, and when I'm done with my first draft, I send it to the 9 hospital medicine fellows to provide feedback. And then they see, usually a couple of versions of that manuscript as it evolves, and they can get a sense of how their input contributed to the evolution of that manuscript. And that really, in some ways it's being vulnerable, but it's great from the trainee standpoint, because, hey, they're providing feedback to me as division director, as a vice chair. And that makes them feel more, I think, empowered to then provide constructive feedback in other settings, not just on something I've written. And I think that's extraordinarily helpful. My email signature has a link that says "Help me improve." And if you click on that link, you can provide anonymous feedback to me. And there are 3 questions on that red cap link. The first is, what are some things I'm doing well or you find helpful? The second is, where are some areas for growth for me? And the third is, what other comments or questions do you have? And it's anonymous. There's no place to enter your name. And I think that's really helpful because, and I don't look at those, we don't download those comments every day. We look at I get a copy of the comments at the end of the month. So that takes away some of the temporal things. Now, if you're working in a lab with, 5 or 6 people, that can sometimes be a little bit more challenging. But there are also other helpful ways to provide that feedback. If you have a trusted faculty member who's either relatively senior or emotionally competent, you can share your concerns or what's going on with them, and then they can take that back to the mentor without having context of who said it, but really what is the challenge or what is the concern. I mean, I think that's a really important way to do that. And certainly if you all have concerns or challenges that you are encountering where you don't feel comfortable approaching the mentor, reach out to either Paul or I. We'd both be happy to listen to what the issue is and then reach out to the mentor to um, help them understand why this is potentially challenging and how they might change their behaviors. And if they're excited and willing to do that, we can also work with our the leadership folks in HR to connect them to resources. That's a great question. All right. What should a mentor be? Effective teacher and guide for sure. Someone who can critically and constructively assess the mentee's strengths and weaknesses without judgment. Sometimes just using the phrase as a mentor, here's what I've observed, can be helpful in providing that feedback. The feedback has to be constructive. So if you identify as a mentor, if you identify an issue, being able to gracefully raise that, but then also partner with the mentee to figure out what the right solution might be. And then they use their professional, academic, and or research expertise to meet the needs of the mentee. Now, the responsibility of the mentee, you have to be proactive. Don't wait for your mentor to reach out to set up a meeting. Get on their calendar. Communication is really key. So defining what the relationship looks like up front is really helpful. And some very basic elements. Mentor is always up to date regarding progress. The mentor has ample availability to oversee your work. And then that you have easy and regular access to seek guidance on anything from research issues to other life challenges. And I think different mentors have different degrees of comfort in that particular part. And we'll talk about that in a moment. All right. How many of you have a career development committee? Maybe slightly more than half in here. So the career development committee is distinct from your mentorship team, because the career development committee's task is to bring a different perspective, bring an unbiased perspective to you and your development and growth. Their goal is not to ensure the success of your research. Their goal is to make sure that what you're doing is consistent with the goals you have for yourself. So typically it's 3 to 5 faculty. I think most people end up having multiple mentors, but only one of those should be on this committee, perhaps the one you consider the primary mentor, because you already have a mentorship team. You already meet with those folks regularly. You want something different. They meet with you at regular intervals, usually every 3 to 6 months, probably closer to 3 months in your first couple of years, and then spaced out as you feel your things are going well and you don't need to meet quite as often. But probably at least every 6 months. And then it includes at least one faculty member from another division. Ideally, in an ideal world, I think it should be at least 2 from another division, because there is strength in if your mentor hears from 2 different people who are unrelated to division, hey, we're thinking about this and we're worried about this, or we're excited about this. It's great for them to hear it from multiple people, not just one person, as may happen if it's the whole committee is just division members and division members you probably interact with on a regular basis already. So that's a really critical component of this. And then I have this last thing, the picture at the bottom with a bunch of people celebrating. And I really do believe that if the end of your CDC meeting doesn't look like that, then you're doing something wrong, right? Because your CDC meeting should be inspirational and aspirational. And so even if you feel you're not on track and your committee members feel you're not on track, you should be able to leave that meeting with concrete things that the committee thinks will help you get back on track. And so if you're walking out of your CDC meeting dispirited, That really worries me because these are people who are supposed to be invested in your success. So they should point out what's going well. They should point out areas that you probably need to address, and it should be done in a constructive way. And if it's not done in a constructive way, it's very, very demoralizing. And that is really not the goal of a CDC. The goal of a CDC is to ensure your success, to help you figure out how you can attain the goals that you've set for yourself, but also sometimes rein in some of the goals because they may be unrealistic in the time frame that you're working with. All right, so what does a CDC look like in practice? As a mentee, you have to outline goals, what you're working towards, and what questions you have for the CDC. That can help focus the CDC meeting so it doesn't go off on tangents. It should absolutely not include a detailed review of the research you're working on. It should be broad, high level. Are you working on manuscripts? Have you submitted manuscripts? Are there barriers to advancement? What else might you need to gain or have continued success? And then connection with relevant experts. And the CDC really should provide this insight and guidance. And one of the nice things about this is you gain a lot of information from multiple people very quickly. It allows the mentor to see what others have to say. If the mentor thinks that things are going great and the rest of the committee is like, I don't think so, that's very helpful. On the flip side, if the mentor is feeling that things are not going well and the committee is really excited, that's also helpful for the mentor to see. And then certainly it broadens your pool of sponsors. And that's really important as a part of this as well. So this is a career development committee form we devised for hospital medicine. And on the right, and I'm happy to share with you all if you want a copy to adapt for your own needs. The right is just what the form looks like. But the organization or the major headings are key questions for the committee. You have to come with questions. What do you want the committee to focus on? Follow up from the previous CDC meeting. So at my last CDC, I left with these actionable items. Here's an update on those. Hey, this worked, this didn't work, that sort of thing. And then your brief biography. Tell your story in less than 200 words. And this is really important for a couple of reasons, right? It helps orient you in the direction that you want to go, or it may make it obvious that you're not sure which direction to go. But this ultimately, one, it will evolve likely over time. But two, this will become the core of your elevator speech as you're meeting people at national scientific meetings, as you're interviewing for jobs. And so the more comfortable you get about telling the story of you as succinctly as possible, the better it serves you in the long run, right? Because when someone asks, what do you do? They don't want to hear 30 minutes of your life, right? They want a minute. And that's where this is helpful. And practicing that on a regular basis is really helpful for those reasons. And then the second part of the form looks like this, and it's really framed around career goals. What are your long-term goals? What are your medium-term goals? What are your short-term goals? And it's okay to say, I don't know for any one of these, because that's where your CDC may be able to help. And then your effort distribution and just a list of your active projects. Again, the goal isn't to delve into the weeds of your projects. You have a mentorship team for that. The goal is to help the CDC help you. Any comments or questions? Yeah.
I have one. I'm not sure that everyone always has two committees, a mentorship committee and a CDC.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I think having both are absolutely essential because they serve very different roles. You know, your mentorship team, of course, they're vested in you. But they may have blind spots because they work with you on a regular basis that others may provide a little bit more insight to. So I think if you don't have a career development committee, it's absolutely essential to form one. And, you know, one thing you can do if you feel comfortable is talk to your mentor and say, hey, I went to this talk and they said I need a career development committee. Can we sit down and talk about this for a few moments? And then talk about who might be good. But if you have someone in mind, I would put that on the table as well, right? This is you have the choice of who is on your committee. And if there is someone who has a lot of, you know, expertise in a particular domain, but personality-wise, they're not a good fit, I wouldn't pick that person, right? This should be helping you. You got a comment?
What do you do if situations arise with the career development team and then team are not aligned and kind of path forward, you know, where they're saying you should go this way, and the mentors are like, I don't agree with that. I assume that doesn't happen often, but it could happen. What do you do then?
Yeah, for sure. When the mentorship team and the CDC have very different ideas, I think from a mentee standpoint, it's important to be thoughtful of both perspectives and figure out which one aligns more with your career goals. Remember, they're not talking about project level things. They're talking about the global you. And so if they are in conflict, you know, I'll give you an example. Say you're working full time, and then for any sort of reason, you decide that working 0.8 is better for you. That's a really important consideration because we know that, you know, over the past 3 to 5 years, with the pandemic and everything, you know, what's going on in the political landscape has really taken a toll on everyone in society. But you know, I think those in academia have often, you know, encountered more challenges. If you're running a research lab and there was a period of time where you couldn't go into the lab or couldn't have more than X people in the lab, that's a barrier to advancing your work. And that is unbelievably stressful. If you have children and the daycares were closed, now you're trying to work from home, or, you know, maybe a barrier to going to work if you can't find reliable babysitting. And we know that childcare is incredibly expensive. In my first 5 years here, we spent about $50,000 a year on childcare because that's what we needed to do to make things work. That's a lot of money. And so there are lots of reasons why you may be choosing something less than full time. And while everyone may not agree that that's an ideal scenario, and while not everyone may agree that that's what that's what you ought to do, this is your life, and you know yourself best. And so you have to figure out how to do that. If it's the career development committee that's very much in support and the mentorship team is not, ideally the CDC and during the CDC meetings, and what I forgot to mention is at the 45-minute mark, we kick the mentee out, and then we talk as a group about things. And this is an opportunity for the mentor and the career development committee to have a little bit of a dialogue about, you know, what might be the right path forward. And then the chair of the career development committee, for trainees, it's often the fellowship director. In other scenarios, it might be, you know, a designated member of the committee can summarize that portion of the discussion. So you're left with some reasonable consensus. But as a mentee, you know yourself best, and you have to make decisions that align for your vision of yourself and who you want to be. All right, we're going to go through a scenario. You have a mentor who you hold in the highest regard. They're thoughtful, they give great feedback, they help push you to the next level. You're writing a manuscript on which they are senior author. But they're really busy and they haven't responded to multiple emails over several weeks in your request that they provide feedback on the manuscript. What can you do? There's probably not a wrong answer here. I mean, there are probably a couple of wrong answers, but but yeah.
I recommend, this.
Yeah, I love that. Scheduling a working meeting and very clearly articulating the areas with which you are wrestling. And then the mentor can focus on those. They may still they'll read the manuscript from start to finish, but they know where they ought to focus. Obviously, they can comment on anything, but you have particular goals. So it's helpful to schedule a working meeting and go in there with an agenda on what you hope to have at the end of that meeting. There was a period while I was division director running my own research program, and I had 5 federal K award mentees. And that was just because of necessity in building a research program within a particular division that had not had a robust history of research. And so occasionally my mentees would schedule a meeting with me. They would come into that meeting and say, here's the manuscript. Can you use this hour to review it and give me feedback? And to me, that was a gift because there's time blocked out. When I block time out for myself to do something, there's so many things that come up that I just feel like I need to address. And so something might get put off and put off. When someone does that, I'm like, this is awesome because now I have an hour where my intent was I'm not doing anything else in this hour except meeting with my mentee. And now I can spend that time reading the paper. What else could you do?
I have a contract, I meant to give a, ops career element, we say like. So we just, out front, we get very clear, like you need to review with somebody, and then if you are not able to, we just say, look, you need to let someone know if you're not.
Yep.
Just don't be in the void, not answering, say, look, I'm gonna have time in 2 weeks, I'll get to it then, and that's fine.
Yep.
I cannot stand the like not responding.
Yep.
Yeah.
So holding your mentor accountable for the things, not that you need a response within the next day, but if they can articulate a time frame during which they'll do it, you can even suggest to them, hey, could we block out time in your calendar for this? So then you have space to work on that. What else? Anything else? Yeah.
Knock on their office door.
Yep.
Done this.
Absolutely. That knock on their office door and say, hey, I need you to review this. Yeah, Paul?
I'll just make it, just to back up what Samir said, these are all things that help your mentor. So that you're not gonna be angry for any of those things, because, the publications especially, your mentor needs those publications with you and wants you to get your publications. And it's a win-win. You're not gonna, it's not like an annoying, distraction. It's something that's on their mind already, but they just haven't been able to get to it in general.
Great comment. Any other strategies? Yeah.
I like to like what we was talking about earlier about like goal setting. Like I try to align back to very specific goals that we talked about, and like give detailed lists of the things that I've accomplished. So sometimes I'll say, over the past 2 weeks, these are the things that we decided to do. Here's the things that I accomplished. Can you give me an update from like your side? And I feel like not that it's necessarily, I think sometimes that can go different ways. Sometimes it does feel a little guilty, but then I think it opens a conversation a lot of times of,
I'm not meeting my goals. How can we problem solve? Is there something else we can do? Sometimes it's turned into like, you know, can you just have people review before me, and then I'll just give the final like, polish to get it off the end.
Yeah.
And kind of renegotiate what some of the tasks are that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Just partnering with your mentor to figure out what are some strategies moving forward. In a probably a very narrow set of circumstances, you know, say you decide that, hey, you know, I think that I'm trying to think of, I don't want to offend any journals, but say you really think that this is appropriate for a journal in your discipline that has an impact factor of 3. You could email your mentor and say, hey, I was going to submit this to JAMA at the end of the week. Do you have any comments before I do? do you think that they would look at this? Some mentors may take that as, oh yeah, I need to review this. Others might panic a little bit and then get to it. But again, it really depends on your relationship with your mentor, and would they sort of really be able to read between the lines on that one or not. All right. This is a really important slide. This was a study done at Columbia by Susan Rosenthal. And she and her team looked at 119 junior faculty at one institution. 99 mentoring relationships were identified among 89 faculty who had at least one mentor. What was really distressing about this study was that in only 40% of cases were relationships mutually identified pairs, meaning the mentee said, you know, Paul is my mentor, and Paul said, yeah, this person is my mentee. Among the 59 mismatched pairs, 43 listed a mentor who didn't list them, but did list other mentees. That's a problem. And there's lots of reasons why this may happen that are not necessarily nefarious. Right? It may be that this is someone who comes to you for advice every now and again. You meet with them, and they, from their perspective, this is a mentoring relationship. But it's a problem when the mentor doesn't recognize that that's how the mentee views them. So it is helpful to establish that relationship up front. And there are people who can serve as mentors in lots of different domains, right? It can be scientific, it can be, you know, career and professional development. It can be just, you know, as you're about to make major life decisions. Steve Ludwig, who was my residency program director at CHOP, and it's really funny that all through residency, I called him Dr. Ludwig. The first 2.5 years of fellowship, I called him Dr. Ludwig. And then in my 3rd year of fellowship, we published a book together. And only after that did I feel comfortable calling him Steve, which is just really comical, I think. But it is really important to clarify your relationship with someone that you view as a mentor. Simply saying, hey, you know, you're an important mentor in my life. Is it okay if I come to you on occasion with these types of questions? Just so they've heard the word mentor. All right. So what do we mean by sponsorship? It is not having a company logo on your shirt or on your billboard. As a mentor, one has to seek opportunities to sponsor mentees. And as a mentee, it's helpful to identify opportunities for which you can be sponsored. And let me talk about how one can sponsor, because it's closely related to how you can help someone sponsor you, right? Identify opportunities. And if you identify an opportunity that you are really excited about, you know, is it a national award? Is it a position on a national or a local committee that is highly relevant to what you are doing? If it's anything, you can go to your mentor and say, hey, I'm really excited about applying for this. Would you be able to nominate me? That is totally reasonable, and I would encourage that, because as a mentor, there may be opportunities that you're just not aware of, or you've sort of got the email about something and then you just got lost in your inbox. And so as a mentee, bringing forward these things and asking your mentor to nominate you is great. And your mentor will be very appreciative of you coming to them with opportunities. It is important for the mentor to recognize the individual's strengths and talents so they can get in the active mode of thinking about, hey, what is this person interested in? What does this person do well? You know, is this particular opportunity ideal for this person? Offering tangible support, of course, optimizing their candidacies through skill development. There are times when you'll apply for something and you won't be chosen. And if the committee that's making that decision provides feedback, they may highlight the gap. And then you can work with your mentor to figure out how do you address that gap that makes you an even stronger candidate for that particular thing. As a sponsor, obviously nominating the mentee for new roles, new awards, replacement of a role that the sponsor currently holds, and then obviously promise ongoing support in their new role. Any comments or questions here? All right. Let's talk a little bit about mentorship or sponsorship challenges or successes that you all have encountered. Anyone want to offer up something? We have 9 minutes left.
So I thought a lot about the list that you shared, and I think communication can be like a very challenging one on both sides. And so I think where I've had success and challenges is that people have different definitions of like frequency of communication, different level of like skill development and how to deliver feedback. And like on both ends, that can be challenging for mentees, feeling power dynamics and navigating that while trying to communicate their needs, and mentors assuming different levels of power even within that dynamic too. So yeah, I guess that's both a challenge and a success. I think where it's been more successful is like upfront with goal setting, just around like how frequent communication. I think a lot of mentors sometimes fall accidentally on like the institution's guidelines, where they'll say we're going to meet at the end of the year and discuss how mentorship went, but then that doesn't leave time for improvement or growth, and sometimes see it negatively when people come more frequently with feedback.
Yeah, this is really important, that the cadence of the meetings is really important. And if you're meeting with your mentor only once a year, I find that hugely worrisome. Ideally every other week maybe, and then ad hoc as things come up, whether that's by email, whether that's by phone or in person. But your mentor should definitely be accessible and overseeing your work, because when you're early in your career and even when you're later in your career, you don't always have the answers or know what to do. Right? Even now I work as part of large research teams, and that is hugely beneficial for me. But we meet on a regular basis, depending on the project. It's weekly or every other week. And so establishing that sort of a reasonable meeting frequency up front, and then also asking like, hey, if questions come up in between meetings, how would you like me to, discuss these with you? Should I send you an email? Should we set up a phone meeting? Should we meet in person, or is there something else? So figuring out what an ad hoc meeting or an ad hoc issue that comes up, how you might be able to address that in an efficient way without waiting until the next meeting.
About the successes and challenges that kind of come together, and the things you mentioned about really like managing the dimensions of intersectional identity and power dynamics that often come up in mentorship relationships. Whether it's how do you identify race, gender, orientation, et cetera, and how that balances the mentor relationship and really figuring out what that mentor is able to give and not that mentor can't serve all the roles and how to really navigate that is what was a challenge and something to like kind of navigate through and have success, and then how to figure out how to. I feel like we always talk about an independent investigator, which is just a misnomer in research. It's just such a name, but really finding a way for the mentee to carve out the thing that they would become an expert in. And if that is happening within a big body of work that the mentor has a role in, how to really navigate that dynamic and developing that independence or area of expertise while having the people support you. I think it's something that I would need to navigate. And then a successful sponsorship when people have offered me for something that they weren't able to do, or even like when you experts, whatever the name of that thing is, I'm not on it anymore. Like people who I knew from back experiences who they did med ed, but like sending me screenshots of like when you tweeted something. I was like, wow, that's really cool. So I think those are things.
Excellent. And you hit on a really important point here that we probably don't talk about enough. So one, you will always need mentors. Even at this level, I definitely have multiple mentors. Not all mentor-mentee relationships work out, and that's okay, right? Sometimes it's just not a great fit. It's helpful if you're able to recognize those things earlier. Part of what helps your ability to recognize it is to understand what an ideal mentor-mentee relationship looks like. And if you don't feel that's your relationship with your mentor, first, I think having a discussion with them about like, hey, this is what I'm wrestling with here. This is what I need. Can we figure out a way to help me with this? But sometimes, right, you accumulate mentors over time. You don't lose mentors, except if the relationship didn't work out. But reaching out to some of your, I was going to call them former mentors, but actually someone with whom you've had a very active mentoring relationship with at some point in the past, calling them for advice and guidance. And if you're experiencing challenges with your current mentor, your earlier mentors can help you troubleshoot or provide guidance on that. And then the other thing is that over time, different mentors in your portfolio of mentors may serve different roles. That someone who is, with whom you're in a very traditional mentorship with early, but as your career progresses, all of a sudden they become a sponsor or a peer. That's really important as well. I remember in my second year of fellowship, my division director on the general pediatric side of things, a guy named Lou Bell, he walked into my desk to ask for help on a clinical conundrum that he was wrestling with on service. And that for me was just so exciting in terms of how he viewed me. And that also made me feel much more comfortable calling him Lou rather than Dr. Bell. And he's someone I go to pretty regularly as I'm wrestling with things, as I need some guidance on what might be the best path forward in those things. And so again, it's not that you have a mentor, it's that you have many mentors who may be more or less involved in your day-to-day work. And honestly, from a mentoring standpoint, I love it when some of my former sort of mentees with whom I've had it working in a research relationship with reach out to me with questions about their work or their career path. I think that is so much fun to see your mentees grow and succeed. And that's really exciting. And so I guarantee that it'll be an exceedingly rare circumstance where you reach out to someone with whom you've been in active mentoring relationship with for guidance or advice, that they would say no. Usually it's within 2 minutes of them reading your email, they've called you on your cell phone. So that's really important, right? The mentor-mentee relationship is really special. And as a mentor, you want to see your mentees succeed, even if they're not at the same institution as you are anymore. And so being able to leverage the expertise of those earlier mentors, really important for your success. Because, right, even the best mentors don't have all the answers. And it's often very helpful to have different perspectives because everyone has their own, I was saying blind spots, but really it's you have your view of the world, and that may not be, and it never is, sort of all encompassing. And so bringing in people with different perspectives can be really helpful for your growth. All right, so what's the too long didn't read? What's your cream cheese? That's your passion. Do you have a desire to learn? And then where's your bagel? And that's where can you find mentorship? And it may not always be in the expected places. You guys don't mind scanning this code. What I find helpful is this should link to an email in which I have a couple of questions for you, and would love some input from you on these questions. It's really about what was helpful about this lecture. Are there things that I should have included that I didn't include, or would have been helpful to include that I didn't include? Are the things we talked about that you found less helpful? So the next time I give this talk, it will be even better than it was this time. And then any comments or questions? I know it's a little after 10, but would love to hear any final thoughts from you all.
Are all the people you have that you mentored in the case, have they done that other thing?
Yeah, so of my 8K mentees, 3 are currently still on their K. 3 have transitioned to R01 or R1 equivalents. And then the other 2 have R21s and are working towards their first R. So yeah, that's really exciting. It's possible that some of these folks will ultimately choose not to pursue a career in research. And that's okay too, right? One's goals and priorities evolve over time, and it's important to recognize that evolution.